Hello guys, and welcome to my channel. Due to YouTube copyright infringement, we only use one picture with voiceover. Thank you for understanding. If you love history and biographies, please leave a like and a sub. Let's start the video. Charles Lindbergh was an American aviator who, in 1927, became the first person to make a non-stop flight from New York to Paris. His groundbreaking journey gave him instantaneous global fame, epitomizing the new era of possibilities and global travel. 5 years later, his son was kidnapped in a story that gripped America and the world. Such was its impact, it has often been called the crime of the century. Although famed for his flying exploits, he was known to have anti-Semitic views, and some feared his friendship with Nazi officials and support of America First gave him a sympathetic view of fascism. Despite opposing America's entry into the Second World War, he later supported the U.S. war effort and flew 50 civilian missions in the Pacific. One of the world's first global celebrities, Lindbergh went from hero to a dramatic fall from grace due to his perceived political views. In later years, he retreated from public view but expressed support for environmental activism. Lindbergh was born in Detroit, Michigan on the 4th of February, 1902 and grew up in Minnesota and Washington, D.C. His father was a U.S. congressman from 1907 to 17, whose most memorable activism was opposing the U.S. entry into World War I. Lindbergh was fascinated with mechanized transport and he enrolled in an engineering degree. However, impatient with theoretical understanding, he left to train to become a pilot. By 1923, he had his own aeroplane, a surplus World War I Curtiss Jenny plane, and was flying solo across the country. Right from the start of his flying career, he gained an attitude as a daredevil flyer, flying solo across states and on numerous occasions taking local doctors to emergency calls in remote areas. In 1924, he enrolled in U.S. Army Air Service and graduated first in his class. He was commissioned as lieutenant in the Air Service Reserve Corps. He also gained employment with the U.S. Post Office Department in their new airmail department. In the early 1920s, flying was still a hazardous and dangerous activity. Safety procedures were rudimentary and the equipment was quite basic. Lindbergh experienced numerous crashes and equipment failure, which could have been a lot more damaging, but he escaped unscathed. The first transatlantic flight was completed in 1919 from Newfoundland to the west coast of Ireland. This spurred great interest in long-distance flights, which seemed almost unbelievable to a population not used to traveling far beyond their hometown. In 1919, Raymond Ortig put up a prize of $25,000 for anyone who could fly nonstop between Paris and New York City. After 5 years, no one had stepped forward to claim the prize. There were several unsuccessful attempts, with many pilots dying on the route, but it did not dim the enthusiasm of potential flyers. In 1927, Lindbergh succeeded in gaining funding of $18,000 to finance his expedition. He bought a custom monoplane he called the Spirit of St. Louis. The fuselage was made with treated fabric over a metal frame and the wings were made of wood covered with fabric. Lindbergh took a close eye on the design of the plane, making an effort to save every gram of weight. With great public expectation, he began the flight on the 20th of May, 1927 from Roosevelt Field on Long Island. The plane was loaded with 1,704 liters, and in total the aircraft weighed 2,329 kilograms, a heavyweight for a single-engine plane. He took no radio, only a map for navigation. He mostly flew by dead reckoning, trying to fly in a straight line. This involved flying through several hours of thick fog and storm clouds. At one point, he may have suffered hallucinations from a lack of sleep. The following day, after a flight of 33.12 hours, he landed in Le Bourget Aerodrome near France. A huge crowd had come to greet his arrival, causing one of the biggest traffic jams in Paris. His successful flight created a surge of interest and excitement, become a global media event. Lindbergh was feted as a national hero, receiving a ticker tape parade in New York. He was named Time Man of the Year, the youngest ever to receive the award, and numerous awards such as the Medal of Honor. Lindbergh grew to find the fame and press intrusion very difficult, and generally he did not like people to make a fuss over him. He recalls once coming out of a building and everyone following him. In the 1920s, people only traveled a small distance from their home. Flying across continents was like a dream, but now Lindbergh seemed to have shortened the distance of the world. Now people realized it was possible to travel from Paris to New York in one day, rather than several weeks. It led to a boom in investment in aeroplanes and helped to boost a fledgling commercial aircraft industry and a boom in airmail. Just 2 months after the epic flight, Lindbergh published an autobiography, W.E. It was first ghostwritten before Lindbergh insisted on rewriting in longhand all 40,000 words in less than 3 weeks. It was one of the fastest published books and was promoted by George P. Putnam, a wealthy financial backer. It became a global bestseller, though reviewers were disappointed that Lindbergh's account focused on the mechanical aspect and gave little in terms of human drama. It earned Lindbergh a significant sum, though he never lost the spendthrift ways he had been brought up on. After the flight, Harry Guggenheim, a millionaire and aviation enthusiast, encouraged and sponsored Lindbergh to go on a goodwill tour, flying across all the American states and then across Latin America. He logged nearly 500 hours of flying time as he took his Spirit of St. Louis to fascinated visitors across the U.S. A year after his epic flight, he ended his tour in Washington, D.C., where his plane has remained on display at the Smithsonian. In 1927, whilst visiting Mexico, he met Anne Morrow. They married in 1929 and had 6 children. Anne Morrow became a well-known poet and author in her own right. In 1932, his 1-year-old child, Charles Lindbergh Jr., was abducted from his home in East Amwell, New Jersey. It led to a frantic manhunt and ransom demand by his kidnapper. On the 2nd of April, a ransom of $50,000 was paid. But 5 weeks later, the remains of his child were found in woods near their home. In 1935, Richard Hauptmann was tried for the kidnap and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. He had been arrested after paying for petrol with cash linked to the ransom. He was convicted and sentenced to death by electrocution. The kidnap and trial created a media storm, and U.S. Congress passed a Lindbergh law, making kidnap a federal crime if it passed across state boundaries. In the 1930s and early 1940s, Lindbergh was a staunch opponent of the U.S. entering into a war against Nazi Germany. Like his father in World War I, he believed that America should remain neutral and not get drawn into European affairs. He was also a key supporter of America First, a quasi-fascist organization that sympathized with Nazi Germany and spoke out against Jewish control of the media in the U.S. In 1938, he visited Nazi Germany and was given an extensive tour of the German Air Force, and he was allowed to fly a new Junker bomber. He was awarded a German Medal of Honor by Hermann Goering, a high-ranking Nazi. Lindbergh refused to return the medal, even after the much-publicized attack on German Jews during Kristallnacht later in the year. He expressed admiration for the strength, purpose and direction of life under Nazi Germany and considered moving his family there until war broke out, saying once, after seeing firsthand the military strength of Germany, he gave warnings to the British, French and U.S. Air Force about the overwhelming superiority of the German Air Force. From 1939, he began giving speeches arguing America should not get involved with a war against Nazi Germany. In September 1941, he gave a speech in Iowa, which was broadcast on radio. His speech was cheered by anti-Semites and racists, but condemned by many others. He later claimed he was not anti-Semitic, but refused to withdraw his statement. Because of his celebrity status, it had a profound impact on American life. His continued sympathy with Germany and expression of anti-Semitic sentiments was badly timed. American public opinion was beginning to swing behind the idea of confronting the Axis power, and the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941, changed everything. Lindbergh dropped his opposition to war and sought to re-enlist, but the damage was done. Roosevelt personally refused his request to rejoin the military. Although he wasn't accepted in the military, he did fly over 50 operations in the Pacific War theater as a civilian. He was shocked by the destruction of the atom bomb when dropped over Japan. It shook his faith in science and progress. With a keen engineering mind, Lindbergh also worked on several inventions. His most notable invention was, in collaboration with a French doctor, an automatic heart valve, which could push blood through the tissues of an organ. This was important research into early attempts at organ transplants. As a pilot in the Pacific, he helped to develop a primitive form of cruise control. Scarred by his political views and public condemnation, Lindbergh retreated from public life and he did not make any public statement or major public appearance. Eisenhower did restore his commission and he served as a brigadier general in the U.S. Air Force. He also served as an advisor for Pan Am Airways, playing a role in the development of the Boeing 747 jet engine and advising them on the purchase of a new fleet of jet planes. In 1953, he also rewrote his autobiography and republished it under the titles The Spirit of St. Louis. In his later life, Lindbergh became interested in environmental conservation and a passionate supporter of primitive cultures, which still lived in harmony with nature. In the 1960s, during the early creation of an environmental movement, he broke his public silence to support the conservation of whales. Ironically, given he had done so much to promote the airline industry, he began to warn about the dangers of supersonic aircraft and the impact on the environment of their emissions. But over his life became more disillusioned with material progress and concerned with spiritual progress of man. Throughout his life he remained sympathetic to the moral and spiritual teachings of Christianity. During World War II, the only book he carried was the New Testament. From an early age, he said Lindbergh was also interested in philosophy and in 1948 published a book of flight and life. It includes some of his ideas on using spiritual principles to avoid the misuse of science and industry. Lindbergh died of cancer on the 26th of August, 1974, on the Hawaiian island of Maui. His tombstone bears the words of Psalm 139. In a modern world which takes air travel for granted, it is hard to imagine the impact his flight from New York to Paris had. It struck a chord with people around the world and made him one of the most famous people in the world. His fame and adulation proved short-lived, with his sympathies to Nazi Germany causing a rapid fall in popularity, so much he mostly retreated from public view. But for 2 decades he was one of the most famous persons in America.